Do you really think globalization is taking a back step?
I think globalization is changing. So after the financial crisis, we saw a fall in cross-border banking flows as many banks retreated to their home markets. I think what we're seeing now is, because of automation, we're seeing a lot of manufacturing move away from low-wage economies and back to more higher income economies because they can afford to produce at home because of automation. I think the big question is going to be what happens going forward. And if protectionism does go up substantially, I think you're going to see many firms localizing more, bringing supply chains back home, relying more on local workers. And that's a big question mark.
What does that mean for inflation across the world? I guess, is it inflationary, so our trade war's inflationary, or does it actually depress the world economy and therefore does it become deflationary?
Well, protectionism is always bad for efficiency. And that means productivity will be reduced. And so I think that is the big risk, is if it has negative effects on productivity, there are real risks around inflation and what happens to interest rates.
What do you see as the biggest risk to the economy in the next 12 to 18 months? Is it really protectionism? Is it anti-globalization, or is it something else?
I think at this juncture, the biggest risks are around, will protectionism really ratchet up? Will the US and China find a solution to the current trade tensions? I think the second big risk is around the sort of normalization of interest rates. And as the Fed raises rates, will emerging markets adjust? Because we've seen it, capital flows were going from rich countries to poor countries because of the low interest rate environments, and now they're tilting back. And will that be orderly? Or will there be some countries that really don't manage that well? And we've seen a few wobbles around places like Argentina and Turkey, but the question is, will there be more like that?
Minouche Shafik, what you're very good at is trying to find social concerns or social problems and trying to find an effective way in the economy to actually address those. You talk about education. Half of our viewers turn off when we talk about education, except if it's Minouche Shafik talking to me about education, because it's concrete solutions. Are governments taking education seriously, retraining people when they're actually displaced?
Yes. I think we have to deal with this issue. If you look at how much governments are spending on training workers for the new jobs, it's actually gone down in recent decades, and private sector spending is about flat. So it's nowhere near the scale of the problem that we have. And if we don't deal with it, those people who are being left behind will keep voting for protectionism and anti-immigration policies. So you can't ignore the problem. And there are solutions, and many countries have found solutions by getting business and education institutions and governments around the table working cooperatively to help people transition to new jobs. There just isn't enough of that happening.
Who's getting it right? Is there an economy or is it a government around the world that you think has it spot on, or if not spot on, at least 75% there?
Yeah, well, Denmark is always held up as a really good example. They have a system called flexicurity, which means that it's easy for firms to let workers go, but on the other hand, firms pay higher taxes, and that money is then used to reskill those workers and find them jobs quickly. The government runs workfare programs, and so really being aggressive about getting people back into work as quickly as possible. So I think that's a very good model.
You do a lot of work, of course, on productivity around the world. What's productivity looking at, like in the UK? I mean, this was the big productivity puzzle. Does a productivity puzzle also explain Brexit?
Yes. I think we've gone around the houses and trying to explain productivity in the UK. I think for me, the most compelling long-term explanations are around education and quality of education. Both the education of our managers, so UK managers tend to be less well-educated than many of their peers, and also the skills that workers have from the beginning, and also their ability to reskill and retool over the course of their careers.
What does the UK need right now? I mean, I know it's difficult. You're a former MPC, and if you look at Mark Carney, he has a pretty difficult job at the moment trying to manage Brexit and the rest. But if you were in charge as a politician, as a prime minister, what would be the steps put in place to kind of, make the transition smoother?
Yes. There is no doubt that the best investment is in human capital and getting skills right from the very beginning, even before school, and investing heavily in those. I think we should look at a much more ambitious program of investing in human capital. Maybe firms need to be given an incentive, like getting, say, human capital tax credits, right? Not just getting credit if you buy machines, but if you invest in your employees as well. And we need to give people the ability to finance new education later in their careers. This generation is going to work for a very long time. Their careers are going to last. They're not going to be able to retire for a very long time, and we're going to have to equip them to work for a very long time. And that means new training opportunities throughout your life.
How are we measuring this? Is there a concern that actually we're not measuring this training or this transition properly?
Yeah. Well, there isn't that much to measure. That's the problem. There is some of it happening. The results are not fantastic in terms of employment outcomes. And the best experience is when it's led by employers. But I think one of the challenges is workers are turning over much more quickly. If you look at LinkedIn, the average CV has 20 jobs on it. So employers don't want to invest in workers that they're not going to retain. So I think we need to look at a very different model where we have public funding with employer provision. The government has done the apprenticeship levy, which was an attempt to do that. They've had big problems with implementing it. But the spirit of something like that is where we need to go.